The Industrial Revolution in America started later than those in Europe, but once it started, it occurred at a much faster rate and was much more successful. The Industrial Revolution sparked a change in the landscape of America that led to a boom of factories in American cities that would be fueled on by a new American workforce. This era of American history is called the Gilded Age. The label came from Mark Twain, who thought that the United States could be compared to a picture in a frame. The open displays of wealth among American elite society were represented by the picture frame, golden and glistening on the outside. However, the rest of America will be represented as the aging photograph, rotting on the inside. The Gilded Age is characterized by the rise of industrialism and big business, a change in production from hand craftsmanship to machine manufacturing. Industrialization triggered a big shift in our economy. By 1880, the value of industrially manufactured goods exceeded that of farm production in the United States. This is a huge change for a country that a little over 100 years before was created by farmers and craftsmen. The Industrial Revolution also brought us some of our most well-known American businessmen, men who gave rise to the entrepreneurial spirit that has forever remained part of our American culture. The idea that with the proper mix of innovation, risk, and luck, you can be your own boss and create a successful business in the United States. Men like Cornelius Vanderbilt, John Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan started some of America's largest and most successful companies and rose to amass tremendous wealth. While these men all came to power in different industries, they often competed and had business dealings that would overlap with one another. You should know the industries associated with these men. Vanderbilt was a railroad tycoon. John Rockefeller started the Standard Oil Company. Andrew Carnegie founded a steel empire that would change America forever. And J.P. Morgan was super successful as an investment banker, so he would try his luck in many different industries. In this cartoon, you can see J.P. Morgan holding trains, ships, telegraph poles, and steel beams, which represent some of the American industries he was a major participant in. Through the Gilded Age, Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Morgan would amass some of the largest fortunes the world had ever seen, even to this day. As their power and fortunes grew, so did their fame and ultimately their legacies in America. Some Americans looked at these individuals as what we would call captains of industry, men who had risen to power through innovation, calculated risk, and their own hard work. They were men who helped to benefit the American economy and therefore aided the American workforce and society. Others looked at them as robber barons, people who had come into wealth through the hard work and exploitation of their workers and through the manipulation and corruption of the government. Here you can see a couple cartoons that show the artist depictions of the industrial tycoons as robber barons. In the top cartoon, the fat and satisfied looking industrialists are being held up by their workers. Various industries are depicted in the cartoon, and the industrialists' fat bellies are stamped with a $sign. In the bottom cartoon, the industrialists are being compared to the robber barons of the Middle Ages, who used to live off the hard work and exploitations of the peasant class. In the final cartoon, you can see a rather aloof U.S. Congress being supervised by the imposing figures meant to represent the different industries in America and the political influence that they would exert. The United States Industrial Revolution was successful for three main reasons. First, an abundant supply of natural resources seemed to promise centuries of fuel for industrial factories. Resources like oil, coal, and iron were essential for the Industrial Revolution, and they were abundant in the United States. Also, our mining booms would bolster the United States Treasury during this time of economic development. Second, improved transportation methods expanded trade from coast to coast. The railroad revolutionized America by connecting us in a way it never had before. And third, in the late 1800s, the American population shifted from rural areas, which are your farm areas, to urban centers, areas with more than 2,500 people. Here in this 1890 map showing population density, you can see the areas that are more populated in the U.S., which are the areas shaded in the darker oranges and reds. Population centering itself on the coasts and urban areas would be a continuing trend, and by 1920, the United States transforms into a country that is much more urban-based than it is rural-based. The Industrial Revolution was also extremely important because of the ways the government supported big business in America. First, it helped by providing government loans for some businesses and industries. Certain industries like the railroads were provided with loans or subsidies from the government to encourage more industrial development. Second, the government maintained a laissez-faire or hands-off approach, imposing few regulations on private enterprise. Politicians felt that the government did not have the authority to police private industry. This was a time where businesses could get away with almost anything because the government was not regulating them at all. While the lack of regulation would make it so that products would be produced with less cost, making the price of goods more affordable for Americans, it would also mean a lack of protection for American workers in terms of working hours and pay. Third, taxes on personal incomes earned by businessmen were not paid until 1913. That means that all of the money that businessmen like Rockefeller, Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and Vanderbilt earned was tax-free. Fourth, tariffs on imported goods were held high to protect domestic goods from foreign goods. Remember, a tariff is a tax on foreign goods. Products that are imported from other countries are sold at higher prices to encourage consumers to buy American products at a cheaper price. Fifth, the government had no environmental controls. The Industrial Revolution would create significant pollution in America, worsening the air quality around large cities and water supplies around factories, but the government did not regulate it in any way. The Industrial Revolution also led to a time of innovation and invention in America that was unrivaled anywhere else in the world at this time. Throughout most of the 1800s, Americans relied on the sun and candles as their only source of light. However, in the 1840s, Americans began to use kerosene lamps in their homes. The rise in the need of kerosene led to the United States needing a constant oil supply. Edwin Drake successfully used the steam engine to drill for oil in 1859. The steam engine made oil drilling practical and led to the rise of the oil industry in the United States, which had rich oil deposits. John D. Rockefeller will rise to dominate the oil industry. Rockefeller was raised outside of Cleveland, Ohio. Despite some hardships at a young age, he would rise to be a powerful, ruthless, and rich businessman. One of his rivals was a Scottish immigrant, Andrew Carnegie. He created a steel empire in America that would alter the American landscape and look of large cities. A British manufacturer, Henry Bessemer, had created a way to make steel at a cheaper and faster rate. Carnegie took the Bessemer process and adapted it for his steel factories. Before this, steel was never used for any large materials due to the difficulty in producing it. Steel was mostly used for small items like forks. The Bessemer process involves injecting air to remove impurities and create steel. The process cut down the production time of a steel beam from 2 weeks to 15 minutes. Steel production at a cheap cost would allow America to build massive bridges as well as change our urban development. The rise in population in urban areas due to industrialization meant the need for more homes and office buildings. Cities began to build upward due to the rise of steel. The Flatiron Building was built in 1902 by Daniel Barnham. The unusual skyscraper sits on a triangular plot of land in an intersection. Although many people thought that it was going to fall over, the Flatiron Building shown here shows the kind of construction that was possible around the time steel began to boom. The building is a good example of the new possibilities in architecture and the changing facade of cities in America. At the age of 31, Thomas Edison changed the way we live by pioneering the use of the electric current. Edison patented the incandescent light bulb in 1880. The light bulb used a tungsten filament that would run an electrical current through it. J.P. Morgan was one of Edison's first investors and the first person in America to have a house wired with electricity. Eventually, Morgan would acquire the majority stock in Edison Electric and push Edison out and rename it General Electric.